Take a look at your Google Analytics. What percentage of your traffic is coming from Canada, UK, EU, Australia, compared to what percentage of your sales are coming from those countries? And if you see a big disconnect, there's some conversion rate optimization you can do to bridge that gap. We're going to help you with that. The second big number, your CPAs are cheaper abroad. And if you could get your conversion rate optimization close to parity with US, there's an arbitrage there. So if you're finding success with your top of funnel efforts today and you have a good ROAS and so forth on your US, can you only imagine how good it's going to be if I gave you a 20% discount on your cost per click and your top of funnel costs? So that's how good it can be.
Alex, welcome to the DTC Podcast. Passport helps brands localize and streamlines logistics in international markets. We're going through a lot of changes right now in international e-commerce. Can you break down how the recent tariff changes are kind of causing DTC brands to rethink the way that they're thinking about global expansion and fulfillment?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me on. Excited to chat with you about all of this. The traditional model would be a brand imports all its goods into the US. It's their single biggest market. They want to keep things simple. They domicile everything in the US. And then they decide to ship things to other markets all over the world. And that makes up, call it 10 to 20% of their revenue. And that was the state of the world up until Trump and his trade policies upended the way in which at least brands are thinking about this whole thing. So now you're kind of considering, if you're a brand and you're doing some real volume abroad, call it, multiple millions of dollars outside of the US, you're starting to think, should I import things into the US, pay these super high tariffs? I made a post about this on X and LinkedIn, but the 30% headline that people are seeing, that's a floor. For a lot of products, a lot of categories, that number is actually going to be 45%, 50% tariffs. So you're looking at 50% tariffs, and you're considering whether or not you want to start just moving product from China. Let's say China, it's going to be other countries as well, into the market where you're seeing some success outside of the US. So bypassing the US tariff regime and start to move product to other markets. That's one big consideration brands are starting to approach. The second big consideration is, do they want to stand up a duty drawback program? So this is something where the U.S. government, it encourages brands to do what I just described, the old method of domiciling everything in the U.S. And if you have to serve a foreign market, great, serve it from a U.S. warehouse with American labor, all of that. And one of the ways in which the U.S. government encouraged that is by giving you a refund on the tariffs that you paid when you import into the U.S. And to a certain extent, it's not completely duty drawbackable, this 30% and the incremental tariffs that I was mentioning, but to a certain degree it is, let's say half, is refundable. So that's pretty meaningful, and brands are starting to explore these new processes that they never really had to worry about, and those processes might even have downstream impacts for things down the line of how they structure their operations with a 3PL and so forth. But that's another big consideration for them. And I'd say, Eric, just like overarching, just like big picture, the U.S. is becoming a high tariff regime. That's already a foregone conclusion, with some pretty high minimums. And it does make, input costs more expensive for brands. And brands are starting to look at other markets to, at the very least, diversify their downstream demand. So the U.S. is only, still the biggest market in the world, all of that, but only, 330 million plus people, and the rest of the world is 8 billion. So really, we're just a fraction of the demand base around the world, and brands have just grown complacent with just having the U.S. as their market, especially American brands or even Canadian brands for that matter. I routinely talk to Canadian brands that, 80% of their sales is US, and like 15% is Canada, 5% rest of world, So a lot of brands have become complacent, and now they're really starting to consider alternative markets to at the very least diversify.
This is the first I'd actually heard of this duty drawback program, and it really makes sense, I think, from what you think about maybe the U.S. is trying to accomplish here. Again, it really just behooves brands to be selling in other international markets, right? What's involved in maybe take a brand that's got some international presence. What's actually involved in getting a duty drawback program kind of up and running?
Yeah. So specifically about duty drawback, it comes down to this core principle of inventory matching, meaning when you import a widget, SKU A123, the government wants to make sure that you're not willy-nilly getting a refund on whatever you want. You shipped something abroad, but it's important for you to match that specific SKU and the duty that you paid for that very specific SKU to the very specific SKU that you're exporting. That's like the core principle of it all. And if you don't have a good inventory management system or there's some overlap with your warehouse management system, your WMS, your IMS, your WMS, and you don't have good data, it's going to be virtually impossible for you to do this. You're going to get rejected by the CBP. Vendors like us, we're just going to say no to bringing you on board as a client. So you really need to have some clean data that lets you match SKUs from import all the way through export. And then there's a wrinkle on top, Eric, which is, this is the worst. I've seen some brands have their applications rejected because of returns. So then they get returns from abroad, and that gets commingled with the inventory. And there's something about that basically makes a lot of this null and void. So obviously the government doesn't want to give up revenue, but they still want to have this, policy of encouraging everybody to domicile in the US, but they're very strict about the application. And traditionally this has been for timber, raw materials, which is much easier to track. It's raw materials. It's fungible. So like oil, but with D2C, this is a new application. It's been done and we're doing it ourselves actually, so we're no longer in the breaking ground stage, but every new opportunity we take on board, we learn about some idiosyncrasy that we need to smooth out and help make it such that we give the brand the highest probability of being accepted by CBP.
As if e-commerce wasn't challenging enough. This wrinkle just really seems to be throwing brands for a loop. What are you seeing? I guess you work with hundreds of different brands kind of going through this process. What are you seeing brands do out there? Are brands taking a wait and see kind of mentality? Or are people acting really quickly to kind of move things around and try to just defray these costs as much as possible?
It's a tale of two cities to a certain extent. There's some things that every brand and every COO, every brand owner and every COO, VP of Ops, saw the writing on the wall from a mile away. So what are those things? Well, Trump's been talking about tariffs since he got elected, since before he got elected.
Since Trump the 80s, pretty much. I think I saw him on Oprah talking about it in the 80s. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. This has been one of the most consistent themes in his worldview. Love it or hate it, he's been incredibly consistent about his view on tariffs, also his view on China specifically. And what he deems economic fairness, and he campaigned on this. So we've seen this from a mile away, and brands that were able to move inventory away from China have and did or are in the process of, and this process began really during Trump 1, to a certain extent. Biden didn't even lower any of the tariffs. So this whole thing about, Trump 1 adding tariffs and it's going to, be so bad when the Democrats took over, they didn't change anything. They kept everything in place, So it goes to show you, I think this is at this point, to a certain extent, a bipartisan position, right? The de minimis going away, is bipartisan, That's another thing. So it's just where the culture, where the American culture and our perception of fairness is going is, this is just where the general population is at right now. There's very few free traders left. I might be the only one, So
it's interesting. I won't ask you to look into your crystal ball too much, but like, do you see this netting out at a sort of low reciprocal tariff across the board for different places? Trying like, he's always talking about trade fairness to an extent, and that works in some cases. In a lot of cases, it doesn't, because you're not producing the thing that you need, or vice versa. Do you have any thoughts about where this situation might net out in 6 months from now?
Yeah. Pretty much at the very beginning of this thing, I made it a goal of mine to watch those like Sunday morning talk shows with Besant and Lutnick. The consistent thing that I would hear from them is that they're viewing tariffs as a revenue generator for the US government to help, balance budget, pay for tax cuts, whatever. They have like their, agenda of what they want to do. Either it's cuts or it's like, actually even adding more spend, but to the things that they care about, whatever, And obviously, the interest rate hasn't dropped. So, we still have like a lot of interest coverage. So they're looking for revenue generating opportunities. They view tariffs as a viable way of getting to the range that I remember seeing was like 300 to 600 billion. Pretty big range, but still, still order of magnitude. You kind of get where they're at. At the time, I think 2024 under Biden was 120 billion, something like that. So we're looking to basically 3 to 5x our revenue overnight. This is like, in the relatively short-term budget. This is, how much we're looking to raise. Okay, that's a valid approach, for revenue generating. If that's part of their plan, it makes sense. This is a way of generating revenue very, very quickly. This concept of like they're paying for it and we're paying for it, I think it's like that argument doesn't even make sense. Obviously, we're all kind of collectively paying for it. It's just like, where does the negotiation end up? Where does the market pressure end up? But like I don't even understand.
Who takes the haircut, or do we all share a haircut?
Yeah. I think like every industry, every company, every situation is a little bit different. Like if your manufacturer has fat margins, then they'll probably take that haircut. If they're literally, that's it. They say, I don't even want the order. If you're making me pay for it, I don't want the order. Okay, I'll tell you who's paying for it. You know what I mean? So that whole like conversation just like never really made sense to me, but whatever. So they're trying to raise this amount. What does that mean in terms of your first question? Like, where are we going with tariffs? Well, let's take a look at how much we import. Let's do some round math, of like prices go up, demand goes down. So if we did like 4 trillion, maybe now with higher prices, it's going to be like 3.25 trillion, something like that. So like I kind of did some rough math. I made a post about this on LinkedIn, but the math kind of rounded out to about baseline 10% tariff. And I wrote this in my post. Like 10%. I like guessed it. I mean, it's like kind of an obvious round number, but it rounded out to about 10% for pretty much everybody in the world. But that wasn't enough to get you to this like $300 to $600 billion number. You needed to either raise everybody to 15% or do 10% everybody, but to have like your biggest exporters, like China, Vietnam, Bangladesh, maybe India, Cambodia, like some of those countries, they needed to be way more than 10%. So they need to be like, call it like baseline 20, 30%, something like that. And even then you're not really getting to 600 billion, you're getting to more like 400 or 500 billion. So you really need those countries to be like way north of 10, and China needs to be like at like 40 or 50 or something like that. So that's kind of where it looks like it's netting out. Like you're kind of, we'll see what happens with like India, China, whatever. Like, but if they non-China, so if they all get 10%, I'm skeptical. I think it's going to be like baseline 10% plus the 301 and, like other stuff, just like standard, most favored nation numbers, which is like a few percentage points. So I think like every country on average is going to be like, say like 10 to 20%. And then like the big ones are going to be like closer to like 20%. And then China is going to be like 30 to 50%. And I think that gets you to about 500 billion in revenue, with, holding 2024 numbers constant minus like a little bit of demand degradation because the price of things are going to go up, something in that ballpark. I think it's like permanent for Trump.
I think that's interesting. And then because they also want to balance, or at least they're saying they want to balance this idea of like bringing your manufacturing back to the US. And I guess there's some cases where that's going to happen, but a lot of cases where it's not. And businesses are just going to have to try to figure out all these ways, whether it's duty drawback or other things, in order to make these tariffs palatable long term. How do you see that shaking out? Do you see this bringing a lot of manufacturing back in the e-commerce world, or is that more for chips and higher defense sensitive products that the US needs?
Yeah, I think that there's some categories that are like special designated categories. Anything around defense, national security, PPP. Remember that was like a whole thing during COVID, where we don't have enough masks, we have to import them from China. That's dumb. Obviously, we need to have that kind of, stuff for another situation like that. Medicines, so forth. I think let's put that in a box. That's its own politicized, heavily scrutinized categories that are kind of very hard to predict. And I do think that there's going to be a lot of pressure to have some U.S. manufacturing base that gets some kind of preferential treatment. But because it's still so expensive and hard to manufacture in the U.S., they also get some degradation in cost structure or whatever compared to international. So the market can, I think, carry both and has to. We need to penalize outside the U.S. manufacturers so much so that there can be a robust U.S. market, at least 20% of the market or something like that. Other categories where nobody really cares, like Trump made that statement that he's upset that Tim Cook is like setting up a factory in India versus U.S. I mean, I don't see a world in which that kind of stuff moves back to the US unless like Trump runs for a third election, you know what I mean? And like becomes like king of the US. And I'll tell you why. Eric. It's because like, people are even saying Republicans are going to lose the midterm election. So really like parties with a lot of power, they hold power for like at most an 8-year cycle, at most in today's day and age. Most likely the mode and the average one is like 4 years, and then there's like 2-year cycles where you really can't do anything as president because you lost the House and Senate in the midterms. So now you're not like lame duck. You still do like some tariff stuff, some foreign policies, but they can obstruct you. They can like put up their own laws that whatever, and you're constantly basically playing whack-a-mole. It's very hard to like an obstructionist Congress, that's like a thing, obstructionist judge system, just like the whole thing. It's like built to put grain into or sand into the gears of the whole system. So it's tough. So like, why would you as a decision maker, especially like an Apple, like moving manufacturing into the US, like, yeah, if you knew Trump was going to be king for like 50 years, okay, maybe you'll do it, you know what I mean? Because you feel like he's just going to like retaliate against you, so you kind of have to do it. But if you don't think that and you think Democrats are going to be back in charge, it's kind of hard to like make a call of moving like your own manufacturing,
I was just watching a documentary on Foxconn the other day, and the amount of skilled labor, the amount of time that it's taken to build up the 3 million person labor force that it takes to do that kind of thing. So yeah, that's definitely not going to happen overnight. Quite a challenge for brands that have complex manufacturing, I'm sure. What about the de minimis? What are we seeing? What impacts are we seeing from this de minimis situation?
Yeah, de minimis was another big move the needle once in a lifetime kind of event that happened in the world of global trade. So our de minimis was 800, which is a lot. Basically, most of e-commerce falls underneath 800. And it went to 0 for China, but it's still 800 for every other country of origin. So it's an interesting dynamic here. There's some preferential treatment going on for other countries. So that's the new big question in the industry right now, is if and when I think a question of when, but it's a little bit of an if. The de minimis is going to go to zero or something else, for non-China country of origin. Hard to say, there's a bill in Congress about it going away. Again, bipartisan, for rest of world, July 1st, 2027. So 2 years from now, you know, and then you hear rumors of it going away in August or September of this year. So there's a pretty wide range of the rumor mill here. I'm not sure. Eric, do you have an opinion on this?
No, I as a Canadian, I'm a bit of a passenger in the trade war situation. I know it's funny. I come from the affiliate background, so I know the de minimis, exception, the lack thereof, is really impacting anyone who is shipping, who exclusively relying on drop shipping. I know it's affecting Temu and some of these other mass marketplaces. But I don't. Yeah, I think we're also very early in this. I was just looking at your post from quoting Harvey Finkelstein from Shopify, just basically saying that they're not currently seeing any meaningful impact on their GMV. I'll say the same from our agency perspective. Like, we're kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop, but it hasn't really impacted. It's impacted our clients and their back end, but it hasn't really impacted customers sort of at this point. We're not seeing any meaningful drop-offs on purchase rate or anything like that. Among the brands that you're working with, what are some of the biggest impacts that you're seeing?
Yeah, Eric, one quick question for you. Have you seen your brands raise prices?
Some have a little bit. Others are still waiting a little bit more. It's one of those things that you just, once you raise prices, it's hard to go back in a way. And so people are being really cautious, I think, about impacting or raising their prices at this point.
Right. I mean, there's a middle of the road tactic, which is to add a line at checkout that said like tariffs or something like that, and make that explicit. Have you seen that?
I have, yeah. I have seen brands doing that, yeah.
And is it effective?
I'm not sure. I'd have to check back in on that particular case as to whether it's impacted things or not. But yeah, I think it's definitely a viable strategy.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, surely it's just supply and demand. When price goes up, demand ever so slightly goes down, right? So just the question is, how much does it go down? And it also becomes a really interesting natural experiment for your brands to test the demand curve. They're like, oh shoot, I should have raised my price earlier. Demand did not go down. That can also happen as well. You know what a Giffen good is, Eric?
No.
It's a really interesting economic concept where I hope I'm saying it right. It's either Giffen or Griffin, where it flips the demand supply logic. So the higher the price, the more demand there is. Like the classic example is Rolex watches. So if you go down the demand curve of Rolex watches, oh, Rolex watch, $70. Like, no thanks, But the Rolex watch, $1,500. Oh, that's a bargain, I'll take it, So like the more expensive it gets, the more people want it because they associate cost with quality and high caliber. So there's some goods that have that effect as well, And sometimes you don't even know. Like, you're not going to have it with like gummies or something like that, but you might have it with with luxury items, backpacks, purses, that kind of thing, where you raise the prices and weirdly enough, the conversion rate goes up.
I remember Swatch was a story like that, actually, where Swatch watches came out and they were made with cheap parts and they were plastic and they had these cool designs, but they were selling them for a great bargain and they was just absolutely bombing. And then they decided to make them a premium product and was like, oh, look at these beautiful designed plastic watches. And started doing a lot better. I don't know if you want to name brands specifically that you guys are working with, but who are some brands, or what are some examples maybe of brands that have made deft moves that are seeing them defray costs, effectively, maybe more effectively than other brands? What are some good examples of what people are doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think one good example that comes to mind is Dolls Kill. They're a great, strong brand, huge following outside the U.S., huge following in the U.S. A lot of their stuff is made in China, and they made some fast moves, and I think that they started to break out tariff as a separate line item. They started to get creative with how they're testing that stuff out. So Really, really impressive team there, really fast moving. And I think at the end of the day, strong brands like that have a following, a community, they're going to do fine at the end of the day. There's there's only so many players like that around the world. So and most of them manufacture in the same places. At the end of the day, in the same countries at least. So everybody's kind of in the same place.
So brands right now that aren't, because we mentioned the duty drawback, which I think is such an attractive thing. It makes sense for brands. What do you recommend for a brand who maybe doesn't have an international presence but recognizes the benefits of it in this current tariff regime? What do you recommend that their first steps are to identify the biggest opportunities for them internationally?
Yeah. So whenever I think about a brand starting international, I try to remind the brand and myself, for that matter, that they're already international. That every single brand, especially e-commerce brands that sell online, either on a marketplace or on their own brand.com, they're accessible by anybody in the world. Obviously, if you have a store on Rodeo Drive in Beverly Hills and that's your only store, you're contained to the visitors on that street. But that's not e-commerce. That's not internet, right? You can have people from all over the world, every nook and cranny hitting your site. So you need to ask yourself, well, how are you getting that audience? Where are they coming from? If you're an influencer-driven brand, I'll tell you, like, more than half your traffic is already coming from abroad. Influencers are so global at this point. You look at Kim Kardashian's Instagram base, I think it's like 85% non-US, 15% US, 85% non-US. And then the question becomes, how are you monetizing that traffic that you're already getting? Look at your conversion rates, look at your Google Analytics and see where your visitors are coming from, and go through the experience yourself. Get a VPN. Sometimes you don't even need a VPN. If you're on Shopify, you could just change, the toggle if you have that on your site. And go through the experience as if you're a Canadian, as if you're in France, and go through it with some empathy of what they're seeing. Are they seeing US dollars, or are they seeing euro symbols and CAD for Canadians? When you get to the shopping cart, are you showing VAT as a separate line item? If you are, that's not really how people see it in the UK, or Australia. They don't see VAT broken out as a separate line item. That's baked into the price of the good. So it throws them off a little bit. It's a little bit confusing, Go on some websites, that are native British sites, Harrods, that's a British site. Go on Harrods, see how they display prices and things like that. Ask ChatGPT, run your product catalog through ChatGPT and have it identify words that have a different word for it in the UK. Obviously they speak English, it's the same language, but they don't say, pants. They say trousers, trousers. I forget what it was for sneakers. They have a different word for sneakers. Tennis shoes or something.
Trainers.
Like that. Trainers. Thank you, trainers. Yeah, that's right. Trainers. So if you're a shoe company and you're trying to be big in UK, you should call it trainers. It's pretty easy, find and replace. So little things like that, they kind of go a long way of localizing the experience. You can crawl, walk, run. You don't need to hit up all of those things all at once. And people see a picture of a sneaker, they know what that is. You know what I mean? So it's okay. It's not the end of the world if you have the word sneaker in there. That could be sort of at the bottom of your list. But just get a feel for it. Look at where your traffic is coming from, and use some common sense. So if you have 20% of your traffic from Bangladesh or something like that, and that's just where your factory is, so your workers are going on the website, you're not going to monetize that Bangladesh traffic as much as you would 12% to UK, English speaking, middle class, so you could kind of get a short list of countries that are really going to drive, call it 80% of your sales, go through the experience, see what's there. If your top of funnel is really not that, it's not influencer, it's not really social, it's more of search or listicles or Reddit, forums and things like that. Same thing. I mean, you can go and take a look at which one of those platforms are global, where people are coming in top of funnel from there, and see if you can translate that into success into another market. So it all starts with top of funnel. You call us, we'll help you with the conversion rate optimization. That's, I wouldn't say easy, but we have that down cold. We've done that for hundreds of Shopify Plus brands. We know all the tricks of the trade of, juicing the conversion rate and creating a great experience for customers. You come to us, but we can't help you with the top of funnel. That at the end of the day, you need to see if you're already having that and you just need some help monetizing it. If 20% of your traffic is coming from abroad, but only like 6% of your sales are coming from abroad, you have a disconnect there, and let's work on closing that gap. Not by lowering your US sales, but by increasing at a faster clip your international sales, So that's where we come into play. But I would say most brands at the end of the day, they like what works for them for US is probably going to work for like the top, non-US markets like Canada, UK, Australia, EU even.
And often at a lower cost of acquisition, or like if all things the same, if you're able to, like you say, to get the friction removed on an international purchase so it looks like everyone's used to, it's got the right symbols and the right words and everything. But all things the same, the traffic costs in these other countries can be lower than what you're paying in the US to offset that during that process, right?
Great point, Eric. Yeah, the cost per click, America has the highest cost per click, I would say. Canada's like 20-30% cheaper, or UK is like 15% cheaper, EU is like 35-40% cheaper, So yeah, great arbitrage there.
Super interesting. I actually just bought a pair of jeans from Australia, from Brisbane, came the other day, and they were expensive. It's actually a creator I've been following. He's a fashion educator, and he's also makes the ultimate pair of dad jeans I bought. You'll be happy to know. But I got them delivered, and it was $100 duty charge. And I'm wondering, when it comes to managing the conversion funnel, does Passport, and do you recommend pushing that cost into the checkout as opposed to collected on delivery? Or what are brands doing well when it comes to that process?
Yeah. Eric, did you pay that upon delivery, or did you pay that up
I
front?
did. I paid it upon delivery. Yeah.
Interesting. Canada Post delivered it?
Yep.
Interesting. See, the thing is about that, I mean, you tell me, but it's not just that you're paying the duties, but you also have to pay this like Canada Post fee of like $9 Canadian. Is that right?
Yep.
So you'll pay duties of $10, and then boom, another $9. That's a lot. That's a lot. That's gonna harm the repeat purchase rate. I mean, did you know that this was going to be a charge when you made
I figured I'd bought things. Actually, I didn't actually even know that he was in Australia. I thought he was US. So once I realized it was coming from Australia, I actually did a chat GPT to figure out, what my landed costs were going to be when I actually accepted the product, and it was more or less accurate. So I was kind of expecting it, but and I have this great connection to this creator, so I was willing to pay this premium for this product. But it was interesting. I'm always like, but I think probably if that price had been included in the purchase price, it might have been enough to make me bounce on the actual acquisition of the stuff.
Interesting. Is the item made in Australia?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. I mean, there's two methods of shipping, let's say, into Canada. It doesn't quite work the same in every country anymore, but one is what you got, which was delivered duties unpaid, DDU, and it's usually not usually, it's through a postal system. So he must have used Australia Post, and Australia Post has a handshake with Canada Post, and Canada gets it, and the same thing. If you ship something back to him, like you return the item or whatever, you give it to Canada Post, and then Canada Post would give it to Australia Post, and Australia Post would deliver it. So this is a very popular method of shipping, especially for like micro entrepreneurs that have high price points, partially because of this dynamic. And there's another interesting thing in this whole thing, Eric, which is this thing called postal leniency. Have you heard that term before?
No, I haven't.
So you kind of lost the postal lottery here, meaning when you ship something postal into Canada Post, not everything gets assessed for duties and taxes, even if it should have been assessed for duties and taxes. Okay, that's this concept of postal leniency, where there's so much volume going through this postal channel of like just like a random stuff, a friend sending you a notebook, a friend sending you a pencil, you know what I mean? Whatever. Like, and the cost to collect the duties and tax and on top of this low value good, it doesn't make up for the cost to collect it. So the duties that you're going to collect doesn't make up for the cost that you're going to collect. Not to mention they charge this $9 cat fee, and you're like, eh, I don't even want it. I don't even want it. It's some gag gift. Now I have to pay this like $5, and then I have to pay another $9. Nah. And you're pissed. You don't want to like deal with it. So a lot of stuff gets rejected, and then it becomes Canada Post problem. They can't just like throw it away. They have to like ship it back. They have a deal, with Australia Post. They have to ship it back to Australia. So there's this thing called postal leniency where they basically only assess, call it. I don't even know what the number is. It used to be very low. They used to assess like 1%. Now it's probably like 10%, 15%. I actually don't even know what the number is. But you know what it might be? You're on the West Coast, right? You're in British
Yep.
Columbia.
Yep.
Yeah, I think I remember hearing that like in British Columbia they like installed some new machines or something like that, and now like pretty much everything gets caught into British Columbia, but the Toronto region is still only like a fraction or something. I don't even know the exact setup, but the point is there used to be this thing called postal leniency, so it worked really well. So it's like, yeah, you might get it, and then like somebody like you'll pay, and then there might like half the time you won't even have to pay, so you just saved $100, between you and the customer, the brand. I'm saying saved $100. So like DDU was a pretty good method of shipping. DDP is the more popular and like it's the more standard way, and the reason is it's kind of a wash on the conversion rate, and you might be surprised by that, even in spite of your anecdote here. The reason is because a lot of savvy cross-border shippers were in like the 15th year of like Canadians buying from US consumers, you know what I mean? And like a lot of people bought stuff from, American merchants or abroad, period. So Canadians are used to it. So when they don't see a line item for duties and taxes, they kind of know that they're going to have to pay it. Maybe DHL Express. By the way, DHL Express, it's like everything you have to pay. There is no postal leniency where like a certain fraction don't get assessed. Like everything, you have to pay everything. So people are discouraged from transacting, and they mentally add in that extra duty and tax. And in fact, it's like very bad for conversion rate because like people are bouncing from the page. They're going to ChatGPT. They're saying, how much extra am I going to have to pay? And then you already forgot about the purchase. So it's actually very bad. DDU is actually very bad for conversion rate because of that, in spite of the lower cost. Because everybody's kind of wise to the extra cost that you have to pay. So you have that dynamic going on. GDP, it's like, yeah, it's a higher price. So yeah, some people might bounce, but at least it's like clear. You're not expecting any surprise bills. You don't think it's going to be like this extra $9 CAD. Your stuff isn't going to be held at the post office until you pay, and so you kind of like trust the purchase and the situation a little bit more. So I would say like maybe it's a wash in terms of conversion rate. Maybe DDP is a little bit better. I would actually say DP is a little bit better, but even if you believe it's a wash, it's not a wash in experience. At the end of the day, people hate it. People hate it, and they're like, "I'll just pay it. Just please, like, put it in the cart. I don't want to like deal with this BS with Canada Post anymore." So or DHL Express. So that's why like DDP I'd say is the most popular now. That like even if you assume it's a wash on the conversion rate stuff, it's not a wash on the repeat purchase rate and the experience and like fewer chargebacks and all that kind of stuff side of things.
So we've got, hundreds, maybe thousands of brands who will listen to this podcast. A lot of them will be, like you say, probably all of them are selling internationally to some degree, whether they realize it or not, or whether they're focused on it or not. What's your message to brands who have some international sales but haven't really like doubled down or focused on that opportunity?
Yeah. I would say take a look at some of those numbers that we talked about. Take a look at your Google Analytics and compare what percentage of your traffic is coming from Canada, UK, EU, Australia. and compare to what percentage of your sales are coming from those countries. And if you see a big disconnect, then there's some conversion rate optimization you can do to bridge that gap. And you should give me a call because we're going to help you with that. Okay. That's one of the biggest things. The second big number that we talked about here is your cost per click is cheaper. Your CPAs are cheaper abroad. And if you could get your conversion rate optimization to parity with US, or at least close to parity with US, there's an arbitrage there. So if you're finding success with your top of funnel marketing efforts today and you have a good ROAS and so forth on your US, can you only imagine how good it's going to be if I gave you a 20% discount on your cost per click and your top of funnel costs? So that's how good it can be. So I would say all of those things, we work with brands on getting them the confidence, getting them the right cost structure to really make it happen.
Very cool. So send you an email, alex@passportglobal.com. Also, you got to follow Alex on LinkedIn because you're pretty active on there. You got a lot of engagement on your posts. I just saw you mentioned, I didn't even know this was happening, but there's a Canada Post is planning another strike at midnight this week.
Yep. Get ready.
Great news. What does that mean? What's the fallout from something like that?
Yeah, well, first of all, this just happened in December, and it was bad. I mean, it was really, really bad. There's businesses that can switch to an alternative carrier network like Passport. So I would say it's good for us, in a way, because a time of flux and change, it pushes people's timelines, and people want to go live with us right away because we have a fantastic alternative carrier network. We work with some of the largest 3PLs in Canada on it. So we're a turnkey solution for that. But there's some categories that you just even we can't really help you, which is like same day delivery. Canada Post actually does a lot of same day and next day delivery locally. And I remember, I forget the name of the brand, but it's like a cookie brand. One of the co-founders is pretty active on X, and he had no way of delivering perishable goods, because his number one service provider was Canada Post for it. So when you're like single sourced, single threaded on your delivery, I mean, what are you supposed to do? Your business literally grinds to a halt, which is really rough. So a lot of livelihoods and businesses are dependent on it. Anything like, flowers related and things like that. And just, like the whole population kind of depends on the post office, everything from sending stuff locally to your friends, to postcards, to, just the color of life, the joys of life, traveling, sending things back. It all runs through the post office. You're not really going to UPS to send a postcard, so
Canada is such a unique challenge too, because we're just so spread out. We just have so much, we have so much land and so few people. So the logistics of just delivery in Canada, I think are always going to be a challenge.
Totally. Yeah, very true.
Thanks for coming on the podcast today. Like I say, you got to follow Alex on LinkedIn. Check out passportglobal.com if you're ready to get smart about your international expansion. This was a lot of fun. Thanks, Alex.
Thanks, Eric. I'm also on Twitter, by the way, at Alex Yancher.
Okay, we'll make sure we get all your links into the post.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for listening to today's episode. If you're not a subscriber to our newsletter, you can do that right now at directtoconsumer.co. I'm Eric Dick, and this has been the D2C Podcast. We'll see you next time.